To understand this modern attack on churches, this phenomenon that we're seeing in various parts of the world, let us reflect a little first. We must understand that our sin corrupts not only our souls, our hearts, us as human beings, but the whole of creation. The whole of creation is affected by our sin. That is why we see sickness, this disease and suffering and even death in the animal kingdom. It is a consequence of our sin. God created a sinless world, but the demons work tirelessly to lead us into evil. And of course, very often they have to work so little to draw us into evil. So willingly do we fall into sin. But also the world is a battleground. It is a battleground where there are many who become saints. There are many who are in the process of finding salvation, who struggle to resist this draw of evil, this corruption. So many who struggle to turn back to God, for we live in a battlefield, a spiritual war. And part of this battle, part of the battle that exists in this world in which we live, involves setting aside parts of this world specifically for God. And in setting these places aside, we ask God to bless and sanctify those places in a unique way. A unique way. God has poured out his life and his blessing into all of creation. That is why the trees are so beautiful. That is why life abounds all around us. For without God, none of this could be. But uniquely he sanctifies places that we offer as churches. And God's grace reclaims those places as sacred ground within this spiritual battlefield. And this is important for us to know. When we enter a church, we should call to mind what we are truly doing, the holiness of the place that we are entering. This is why we make the sign of the cross. We are calling down, asking for God's blessing, but we're calling also to mind what it is we're doing. We're entering a sacred place when we enter church. We're entering a place where God has chosen to reveal himself and his kingdom in a way that can be experienced nowhere else in all of creation. Now, of course, St. Paul teaches us that we should pray everywhere and always. Even out in the woods, we should offer our praise and worship to God. But a church is a place where God has chosen to dwell as in his home. Now, just as our Lord said during his earthly ministry that he had no place to lay his head, so to the creator of the world remains a kind of stranger in this world. A stranger because he is ignored when he calls men back from destruction. He's rejected by his creation, by the hearts of so many men. And in this rejection, in making himself, willingly becoming a stranger in his own creation, God travels with those who are spiritual pilgrims in this world, those who recognize that this is not their home. He joins us and journeys with us as strangers in this place. In church, God gives himself to those who join him. He manifests his power in a way that no other part of creation can lead us into. And we read it in the prophet Isaiah. God says, I will make them joyful in my house of prayer, my house of prayer. God is the creator of all things, but it is in his church that he is glorified as such, that he is worshipped properly in his church. And so then, first, we shouldn't be surprised when people are reluctant sometimes to enter a church when they have rejected God. Those who've rejected God can be very resistant even to crossing the threshold into a church at times. because they feel a certain discomfort in a place where God's presence is so clearly felt. And this is why so many churches are now being burned in France, in Canada, why so many churches are being desecrated across Ukraine, something ignored by our media, even by the UN, by our government sending so much money, but ignoring the persecution of Christians there, as their churches are desecrated, as their holy icons, their relics are destroyed and stolen. This is why the Soviets destroyed relentlessly so many thousands of churches, why they rejoiced at the bombing of our cathedrals. Because it's not enough for Satan to defile us, to defile our hearts. Let us remember that to Satan, churches are a sign of his defeat. Every church is a declaration of the defeat of Satan. And hatred of God that the devil is filled with inspires those who reject God to attack God's house. It is a demonic act. And every time we hear and read of churches being desecrated and burned, we must recognize it is a sign of evil, of satanic activity in that city, in that nation, in that place. The demons will do everything, of course, to keep us from church. They'll produce a great list of reasons why we can't go today. It's too far, I'm too tired, I'm too busy. But the saints tell us that every step that we take to go to church is measured by God and will be rewarded in his kingdom. When God calls us to knock, keep knocking. It isn't simply raising a hand, it is struggling, making an effort, journeying when we are exhausted at times. And with spiritual eyes, we will see the true value of our churches. With our worldly eyes, perhaps we see a tired building that needs a lick of paint. But with spiritual eyes, we will see the house of God. We will see a place that abounds with God's grace. A modern living saint tells us that if we could truly see the grace that our churches are filled with, we would gather up the dust from the floor. Such is the holiness of our churches. So let us run to God's house at every opportunity. And when we are there, may our hearts find a true peace and a rest and a joy when we see all around us in church the signs of our true home.